This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. So here's the title of the book. A Very Short History of Life on Earth, 4.6 billion years in 12 pithy chapters. How many people on this planet can actually give a legitimate narration of life's life story? My guest today, Henry G., is a senior editor at Nature and is the author of probably more books than I can count. He also happens to be a British paleontologist and evolutionary biologist. So he's got the chops to pull off where we go today. And I'm telling you, I take him all over the map. But he's a good, gracious guest who obliged me on all the different directions that I wanted to go. Look, we can all get preoccupied with the latest whatever it is out in the news media about this and that. But you know what? The little kid in all of us comes out when the dinosaur conversations start. And it just so happens that Henry is actually a friend of the original T-Rex guy, Jack Horner, who was on this show very early on. So I'm bringing it full circle. Without any further delay, let's jump right in with Henry and talk a little bit about our planet, all 4.7 billion years of it. And where is it going in the future? Will it be around? All kinds of interesting questions. Without any further delay, let's jump right in. Let's jump in with something really big picture to get people into your world and your perspective. I'm starting to notice, and here you are, you actually know a lot of the details, but I'm starting to notice that I'll talk to a lot of guests that perhaps have psychology backgrounds or business backgrounds or venture capital. And the next thing I know, I'm being told about climate change. I just always kind of shake my head because I don't know, I want to say a bad word here, I don't know blank really about climate change, other than I hear the phrase used everywhere. And some people might call her sweet, some people might not call her sweet, but the young lady from Europe that's yelling about climate change nonstop. This is a very deep subject. It goes on for a long time. I think one of the most interesting things for me, and I'm going to let you expand here, I can look back in time and there used to be something called Pangea, okay, one massive continent. And then it kind of spread apart. The tectonic plates spread it apart. And so you see something like that and you're like, well, gosh, I don't want to pollute the world. I don't want to have bad air. I don't want any of this stuff. But I say to myself, how much can we really control on this rotating molten rock filled with liquid metal? How much can we control?
Well, first I have to say, before anyone thinks I'm a skeptic, I'm not. Climate change caused by human beings is real and happening very, very rapidly. And it's because people have been burning fossil fuels that took, within a century or two, that took 70 million years to accumulate. All that carbon was buried over 70 million years or more. That's coal, I mean, not including petroleum. We've been releasing it in the past 200. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It traps heat radiated from the Earth. Naturally, the Earth is warming up, and that has a lot of energy bouncing around in the atmosphere and not escaping into space. And all that energy gets up to mischief, and it causes droughts and wildfires and sea level rise and ice melting. And it's a real thing. It's happening, and it's something that is a global priority. Having said that, climate change has happened a lot in the past, even without human beings being there, as you know. Continents drift and continents smash together, volcanoes are produced. Over the Earth's history, it's been at various times a complete ball of molten lava. It's been a world completely covered in ocean. It's been a world that's been covered in jungle from pole to pole, or it's been completely covered in ice miles thick. And the Earth has been all these things. And at the moment, we're in a slightly warmer a happy medium. When I hear, I suppose it's because I'm a Brit and I like to keep calm and carry on. I don't like hearing catastrophe and climate and emergency. I think such talk turns people off, to be honest. I think people need to be a bit humble before the evidence and have a bit more perspective. Now, having said that, human beings are, as far as we know, the only species on Earth that is aware of its own effects. We're not like the bacteria which 3 billion years ago or so invented this new kind of energy-producing process called photosynthesis, which released as a byproduct this odorless, colourless and entirely lethal gas called oxygen, which wiped out most of life on Earth, which had evolved in its absence. We're producing lots of pollutants, but we're aware we're doing it. So it's a good thing to try and limit it, because it's not just affecting ourselves, it's affecting the crops we plant, the pollinators that pollinate the crops, our ability to have clean air and water and so on. Another thing is the young lady in Europe, who's a very brave young lady called Greta Thunberg. The thing about very young people, and it's terrible, I'm 59, but the thing is climate change caused by humans, although it is severe, is actually extremely recent. And very young people might think that it's always been this way and people aren't doing anything about it. Neither is true. Pollution in the Earth has been significant only in the past 200 years or so, 200, 300 since the Industrial Revolution, which in geological terms is nothing. It's hardly a breath. So that's one thing. Also, the population of the Earth has increased exponentially, and you know about exponential increase. It can be exponential when it's tiny and it takes an awfully long time to build up. But I'm 59 and the population has doubled in my lifetime. It's quadrupled since my grandparents were born. You may remember, I certainly just about do. I was only a little boy at the time, but you remember Paul Ehrlich and the population bomb in the 60s saying, the population is going to increase out of all bounds and it's going to be terrible. Well, the population now is more than double what it was in those days. And yet, people generally, and I'm talking very broad brush here, people generally have greater life expectancy than they did. They live longer and they live more affluently than they did. It's not just me. The UN Sustainable Development Goals show that a generation ago, only 1 in 5 people completed elementary school, and now it's 1 in 2. Everyone will be completed elementary school by 2030.
Let me break in here because I know a little bit more about what's going on in that mind. I bring up the topical example. Let's face it, climate change, as you just defined it, is essentially topical given the life history of the planet, almost 5 billion years. Now that you make the case that climate change is real and that humans are causing it, how much more time do we got as a species? How much more time does Homo sapiens have? No matter what we do, how much time do we have?
Mammals, of which human beings are one, generally survive as a species for only about 1 million years. And we've been around for 300,000 in one form or other. But human beings are an exceptional species. We could disappear all next Tuesday, or we could go on for 1 million years because of our technology and the things we do. However, I don't think, and this is just my guess, I don't think we'll be around much longer than another few tens of thousands of years at most. There are a number of reasons for this. I only sketch them in the book, but I'm beginning to think of them more deeply. One is, and the main thing is a very, very good thing, actually, that's happened in the past century. The single greatest cause of human happiness and welfare has been the political, social, and reproductive empowerment of women in the past century. Because of this, the workforce has potentially doubled. People are having fewer children and people are becoming more educated. It's largely to do with the empowerment of women. But the flip side of this is people having fewer children. We have an opposite problem to the population bomb of the 60s. Now, the world population, the growth of the world population is still increasing, but the growth rate is being cut rapidly. In 1968 was the peak. It was over 2%. You can find all this in a wonderful, marvelous, if you like facts and figures, you can just go and bathe in this site called Our World in Data. But the growth rate peaked in 1968. It's gone down. It's half that now. It's 1.3 or something. Now, that means the world population is still increasing, but it's slowing, and zero population growth will be towards the end of this coming century. As someone said, prediction is very hard, especially about the future. So people have population demographers have a whole range of predictions depending on the assumptions they use. But about the 2060s, the population will peak and then it will start to go down. Now, some predictions say it will be less than it is now, even by 2100. This is causing a great deal of social and political upheaval. Countries are running out of people. And it's not just in the developed world, but all over the world. Population replacement is not high enough to maintain the population. Now, as you can imagine, China is one, but there are some that will be half the current population in a century or so. Some surprising ones. Well, Italy, Spain, Japan is a canonical example. There's also a number of other things. One is, which I haven't really looked into, but it seems to be true, is that human sperm quality, now, I don't know, this is a family podcast, is that human sperm quality is plunging. Nobody really knows why, but it is. There's been all sorts of suggestions, but that's one. So I don't really know much about it, so I'm not going to go on. And another one is resources. Although people are generally wealthier than they were, the problem now is generally one of wealth inequality than absolute wealth. However, I'm perhaps the first generation that is less wealthy than their parents. And it's simply because there are fewer resources to go around. And that's another thing that's driving populations to decline, because people can't afford to buy a house, people can't afford to have children, and such and such and such. And this is partly related to the effects people are having on the earth, because there is less resources for people to have because we've dug it all out, we've mined it all out, we've fished it all out.
Let me take you to the hopeful, positive, futuristic perspective. I just watched I've watched it many times, but Christopher Nolan's film Interstellar. The whole film is about solving essentially what you're laying out, that we probably won't make it here on the planet not too far into the future. We'll probably be extinct. And you actually make the case in your work. You kind of explain why Interstellar is probably not going to be the option for us.
Oh, I love that film, Interstellar. I went to see it with a good friend of mine. We went to our local cinema. He's another sci-fi buff. He's a Stanley Kubrick geek, so he loves 2001. So we went to see Interstellar and we enjoyed Interstellar. And when we came out of the cinema, 400 years had passed and all our friends had died and we didn't understand the world anymore. But apart from that, there are a couple of other things to say. Human beings will massively decrease in the near future. So this might be good for the environment. We will live for longer, but it'll be a completely different kind of society because there'll be fewer people. Now, there'll be a lot more automation. Here's another interesting thing that people who go on about environmental catastrophe don't tend to know about. And I'll just digress here. Per capita consumption in the world is still increasing, per capita energy use. However, in some countries, notably the US and the UK, because I'm in the UK, per capita energy use is decreasing. And it's been decreasing. It plateaued in the 1970s. I first visited the United States in like 1992 or something, and I've been many times. And it's made even in the difference. In the UK and the US, cities are cleaner, and people don't drive these gigantic gas-guzzling cars anymore. They're only seen in productions of Grease. You don't drive those. And even in the UK, this is something I found out. Just in the UK alone, per capita energy use has decreased by a fifth in just 20 years. So people are using less.
Before I go back to that, though, I lived in London for 6 months in 1994 in grad school. And I remember I'd walk everywhere in W1 and I would come home at night and I would cough up that black diesel stuff. I'm sure that's not the case today.
There could be a future for human beings in space. There are only, I think, 13 people who ever landed on the moon. And they're all male. So this isn't very much good for reproduction. And nobody's been back since 1972.
Some people say that we were never there.
We could have that argument as well. But what you tend to find in technology, it starts a bit and then it disappears for a bit and then it comes back and then it comes back a bit more and then it becomes commonplace. So, for example, 125,000 years ago in South Africa, people invented bows and arrows and then they forgot about it for 10,000 of years. And then they reinvented it and they reinvented more. And then after a while, everyone had bows and arrows. Space travel is becoming more fashionable now. And now it's becoming technologically cheap and reasonable enough that private corporations are sending. It's not just the preserve of big government. Private corporations are sending Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson and everyone else sending people off into space. At first, the tourists will be fabulously wealthy. But that was once the same thing true for air travel before COVID. We all had these wonderful things called aeroplanes, and we used to go and fly everywhere at a moment's notice for not much money. It became a mass medium. And when you think about the rate of technology increase, in 1919, two fellows flew across the Atlantic in a contraption based on wood, canvas, and lawnmower engines tied together with string. 50 years later, almost to the day, two men landed on the moon. Amazing. Just 50 years. It'll be quite soon when people will be in space routinely.
What about living there, the interstellar vision, leaving the planet, having enough people off the planet to reproduce and to continue? You come down that's probably not going to happen.
It may happen, but it'll be at the cost of humanity. There will be after a while, people will go out and colonize hollowed out asteroids or space stations and moons on other planets and other things. But the thing is, these populations will be quite small. They will be very, very far apart. There won't be much interaction between them because of evolution. What happens when species are marooned on small islands is they tend to evolve in different ways into different things. And because they don't meet up and reproduce, they become different species. They look at each other and go, they won't interbreed. And one thing is very important about small populations is they do go extinct quite a lot just by accidents. I mean, more populous species are harder to kill, except there's another thing that large species are in danger of. But I think a future for humans in space is possible, but we might not be humans anymore. The probability of each single colony becoming extinct is very high. That's why I say I don't think there is any long-term future that way. That doesn't mean it won't happen, but I think it's a very, very small chance.
You make an interesting case in your work that got me thinking. I mean, I'm just bouncing around to so many issues because I can just pick your mind all day long. But I love the idea of when we are gone, when humans are gone, okay, the Earth will go on for some period of time. At some point in time, the Earth will end. When we are gone, millions of years later, here we are now with all of these cities, all this technology, et cetera, et cetera. But future travelers, millions of years after we're gone, might not be able to find much of us left, if anything.
Yeah, that's quite true. And what people tend to forget is that fossils, evidence of past life, are extremely rare. They're only found now and again. Well, fossils of large creatures, particularly on land. See Jurassic Park or Jurassic World, and you think T-Rex was roaming around in huge quantities like forever. But there aren't that many T-Rex fossils found. And most dinosaurs are only known from one or two tiny scraps preserved over a length of millions of years. That means the chances that many species existed but were never preserved at all is very high. So even species that we think were very common have very little to show for it. But it also depends on time. I mean, when humans are gone, there will be sort of scraps and bits and pieces. But let's take a really long-term perspective. Let's imagine that some space traveler of the far future comes to the Earth in 250 million years' time. Now, that is the same length of time between now and the Great Permian mass extinction, which was the greatest mass extinction that we know about, when more than 95% of all species in the sea and 70% on land were wiped out by volcanic eruptions that lasted over 500,000 years. And we can see pretty good signals of this in the fossil record now. Even so, people are still debating the exact cause and exactly when it was and exactly what became extinct. Let's just imagine another period of time has elapsed and some little green people arrive on the Earth from their spaceship and try and work out what had happened. Now, I got this. This isn't a completely original thing. I got this from my friend Ted Neild, who's a geologist, and he wrote a super book called Supercontinent, which he says is not a book about the importance of pelvic floor exercises, but about continental drift. And he says that in 250 million years' time, all the continents will have come back together again, like Pangea, but in a different way. A lot of what's been on the Earth now has been sucked back into the ocean depths, has been completely obliterated. People will look at the Earth and probably have no inkling that human beings were there at all. If they've got very, very sensitive equipment, they might find some thin, scuzzy layer occurring at about the same time all over the Earth when something happened. But our little green people will go, well, debate what exactly. That's just my prediction of what little green people will sound like.
You just sounded like a classic Twilight Zone episode there.
But another thing Ted said was, we'll still see things on the moon because the moon has no erosion. 250 million years' time, there'll still be Apollo capsules and footprints on the moon. So our interstellar people will think, there were people living on the moon, but they weren't living on the Earth. Maybe there were other aliens who came and visited the moon, looked at the Earth. There'd be no reason to connect this tiny, thin, scuzzy layer on the Earth. There's another more recent mass extinction, which is much more well-known because it involves dinosaurs, and anything that involves the dinosaurs gets a lot of publicity. The dinosaurs died out one sunny morning in the spring, 66 million years or so ago, when a large asteroid hit the Earth. Finding the evidence for this is one huge cataclysmic event that happened just once in one day. So we know it was a one-day event, and it was big. But it took a long time to discover the crater because it's now buried, and it was only discovered by people carefully looking at Mexican oil exploration records, oil drilling, and also because people found this tiny, tiny layer all over the world of ash and this metal called iridium that is only generally found in asteroids and most common. And that was 66 million years ago, which is just the other day in the Earth terms. Of course, we knew all about dinosaurs because they've been living for 160 million years. But just imagine if there was some dinosaur civilization that had only been happening for a few hundred years or a few thousand years just before then. It might all have been completely smashed up by the asteroid impact. We might just never know it had existed.
It's a great perspective to get people thinking about how precarious everything is. We think of ourselves as so dominant, we can't be defeated. But when you lay it out like this in your work, it just made me feel small.
There's a funny thing. When I got to the end, I wanted it to be generally hopeful. I think that the climate change problem is serious, but it's not insuperable. People have said we're living in the sixth mass extinction. I mean, there were 5 big ones that happened in the past 500 million years ago, and we talked about the Permian one and the Cretaceous one, but there were some other ones. We're living in the 6th one. But the problem there is comparing chalk with cheese. How do you compare extinction from in the past, for which you have very little evidence and it's hard to find, with extinction that's happening now? It's very difficult to merge those two kinds of data. And the general feeling is that we're not living in the 6th mass extinction, not yet. We have to keep doing what we're doing, destroying the planet, for another 500 years to even register among the big 5. And we've only been doing what we've been doing for less than half of 500 years, and we are already taking steps to stop what we're doing. I'm generally a little bit hopeful. However, being a science fiction buff, as I am, at the very end of the book, I look at one of my favourite books, which is by a very little-known author called Olaf Stapledon, who was an English writer. He lived in England. He died in 1950. He was a pacifist. He served in the First World War in the ambulance service on the Western Front, so he saw lots of destruction and dead bodies. And he wrote this book called Star Maker in 1937, just before the Second World War. He has this immense cosmic vision of the whole of the universe. At the very end, he says, what can we do? How do we relate to this when even huge wars are of such insignificance? And he gave 2 very, very, very contrasting things. He says, we have 2 lights for guidance, and that is our own little atom of community, meaning our families, not friends. And the other is the light of the stars, these pitiless, eternal things, which seems very strange. But he said, it's still a good and noble thing to try and make the best of the world for us while we are still here, even though it probably doesn't matter a jot in the great scheme of things. Because after all, we want to be happy and wealthy and healthy, and we don't want to go around thinking of doom and gloom all the time. All we can do is our little bit. We can't do anything else.
Before we started recording, that I mentioned that I had interviewed Jack Horner on this podcast. I also had Peter Larson on this podcast too. Let me give a little bit of a setup here. You might have heard this before. I think you said you listened to a couple shows, but I had this good fortune, this experience. I would call him a countryside uncle in Southern Virginia on the James River. And he took me out in a canoe one day. I was probably, 10 or 11, 12, 13, somewhere in there. He took me out in a canoe, and along the James River, there'd be a fossilized shell bed. And then there'd be these cliffs, kind of just very dirt cliffs straight up, maybe 50 meters. And then at the top of these cliffs were plateaued, probably really nice estates, very expensive estates. So you're up on a natural cliff overlooking the river, a beautiful view, very expensive property, I'm sure. He had found a megalodon tooth. He had found at least one basketball-sized vertebrae. I was down visiting him in Southern Virginia, so he took me out. So we go out and park the canoe along the river. And of course, we're not supposed to be doing this, kind of scale up the dirt. The cliff was going inward some, so you could kind of climb up 5-10 meters. And we found what looked like a vertebrae popping out, another one. And it was in a different area than he had been. And then we just started with our hands digging, and we literally pulled out 10 connected vertebrae with the discs in between the vertebrae. All the vertebrae were probably near the end of the animal because they were started off as about the size of a basketball, and they got down to about the size of a fist. But I got to tell you, that was one of the great experiences of my life.
It would have been.
Even if I tried to plan that as a professional, if I was trying to plan that excavation as a professional, there's probably professionals around the world that have never had that much fun.
No, that's probably quite true. I'm a lousy hunter. I've never discovered anything much.
It was so cool. I don't know if you heard this, but the sad thing is that various times I tried to borrow the bones from him or whatnot, because when you laid him out, it was like 3 meters long. We had
There's probably a whale.
Yeah, a whale or a shark. But he, in his infinite countryside wisdom, he left the fossils, the vertebrae, outside on his picnic table for a couple decades. And they went from being essentially hard rock to balsa wood in 20 or 30 years. And I just want to kick his butt so for millions of years, they're protected. And then in less than 30 years, he kills them. Ah!
Yeah, this happens. I mean, fossilization to start with is very rare. I mean, most animals that die just get eaten and scattered. What most fossils are marine creatures that just fall to the bottom and get buried very quickly. And in that part of the United States, from Virginia down through the Carolinas, there are a lot of sharks, there are a lot of whales that are preserved in those coastal cliffs. But they can be weathered out of the rock and just weather away, and nobody would even know they were there. And I had this when I was very fortunate enough to go with the Leakeys, Meave Leakey, Richard Leakey's wife. Richard Leakey's now mostly a politician, and his wife, Meave, and her daughter, Louise, are now running the show in Turkana. And in 1998, Meave invited me out to join them, for a couple of weeks, to see what they were doing. To find fossils there, it's like horizontal cliffs. The deposits are 3 million years old, and they're all spread out on the ground. You just walk around on the ground very carefully until you see something, because they're all on the surface. And if you find something, an interesting bone, you then get a little dental tool and you scrub around it to expose it a bit. And then what you do, because you can't expose it all at once because you don't know what it is, and then you cover it with this glue, this hardening agent. Then what you have to do is you have to cover the whole thing with rocks. And you have to do it for two reasons. One is because the goat herds might trample it all to dust. Another reason is hyenas really love that glue. They really get high on that glue. And hyenas can crunch through your fossil. But another thing is, when a fossil's been interned in the earth is a stable environment. But when it comes into the atmosphere, it dries out. Tiny little pockets of air heat up and explode and shatter the bones. So your country uncle, this is what would have happened. This creature would have been stable in the earth for maybe 20 million years or so, 20, 30 million years, and it comes up and the little mineral grains inside heat up and go bang, 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 and it just destabilizes the whole thing. A fossil is only found not only if it's lucky enough to be fossilized at all, but only when somebody who just happens to come along at the very moment when it's ready to be dug up. Because before that, it's buried in the earth, and after that, it's just washed away.
A lot of luck.
Yeah, I see it on where I live. I live in a small town called Cromer, which is in England on the North Sea coast. It's about 200 miles north of London, and it's Ice Age stuff. Ice Age dirt. There is a place a few miles walking distance from where I live called West Runton, where 800,000 years ago, there was a great big lazy river that went into the sea, which was much further out than it is now because it's very eroding. You can see this bar of dirt on the beach, and things are weathering out all the time. I mean, whole mammoths, whole rhinos have weathered out this dirt. But unless you're keen enough to find them, they soon crumble away to nothing. And you see erosion now happening. Because the cliffs aren't very solid, they're made of Ice Age dirt. It's one of the most heavily eroding coastlines in Europe. And you can see this because their houses teetering at the top of the cliffs, and whole houses have fallen into the beach. And you can see the fossils of the future, remains of pipes and bricks and bits of house on the beach. And you can see them eroding away to dirt. I've looked at this for years. I thought, what are the fossils of the future? House bricks don't last any time at all. I mean, they just get washed away into tiny little round pebbles until you wouldn't know they were made by human beings at all. The same with all the other stuff. The plastics get brittle and get smashed into tiny bits. The metals rust away. Our human constructions, if not constantly maintained, will just get worn away by wind and weather in a very short time.
As they say, go by the way of the dinosaur. While we're talking fossils, because I think you're going to surprise me here. I don't know the answer to this question.
Well, I might not either.
You'll have better educated guesses than me.
Let's see how it goes.
In the last, I don't know, you pick, let's say 25 years, 20 years, whatnot, the most important 3 fossil discoveries. They could be animal, they could be human, hominin. What are the most important fossil discoveries that we have made in the last few decades?
Strange enough, that's a question I have no hesitation in answering. That is the discovery of this strange little hobbit-like human creature that was found in a cave on the island of Flores.
Indonesia, yeah. Close by me, a couple-hour flight.
That's right. It was found there in 2003. There are other important fossils that I've been party to exposing to the world as I've been an editor at Nature, like feathered dinosaurs. They were the biggies. The most important single one was Homo Floresiensis. Was completely unexpected. I mean, people kind of expected dinosaurs to be kind of feathered because they look like birds, and then more and more people they look like birds. People were looking at Flores. I mean, you know the geography. There's Sumatra and Java and all the little islands, and they get to Timor, and then there's Australia. One of the big issues in anthropology is when human beings first set foot on that magic land far away we now associate with cold lager and the adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. And there's a lot of debate about when people first set foot in Australia. Was it 60,000 years ago? Was it 40,000 years ago? And there's been a lot of debate. One of the things people wanted to do was trace the spread of modern humans throughout Indonesia to Australia. Now, on Flores, there's this cave called Liang Bua. It's a great big cave, and it's not hugely inaccessible. It's a big open cave, which villagers have been using for time immemorial as a place to, it's a nice cool space. There's a great big taro patch just outside of it for a meeting centre, for schools. For a long time, there's this Dutch priest called Father Verhoeven from the days when Indonesia was a Dutch colony. He'd been digging in the earth in this cave for various things. There were some expeditions by some Indonesian and Australian scientists, and they dug 6 meters in the ground, and they found this skull of this tiny, 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 tiny creature. It looked human, but the brain was tiny, and it had these enormous teeth. And they found a few other bits as well. And they sent the paper to Nature, and most people who send papers to Nature have a pretty good idea of what they found, and they hype it up, and they say, gosh, isn't this fantastic? Now, the paper that arrived on my desk was written in very muted tones. They obviously had no idea what they found because they weren't expecting to find it. They were looking for modern humans, and they found this weird thing. They gave it a name. They called it Sundanthropus florianus, a man from the Sunda Islands, Florianus. I sent this to the referees, and they said, well, very helpful. They said it's a member of our own genus Homo. But they also said Florianus actually means flowery anus. You can't have the man from the Sunda Islands with a flowery anus. What they actually meant was Floresiensis, human being from Flores. And it was called the Hobbit because they found it in a hole in the ground. It was only a metre tall and had great big feet. It was so primitive and so weird and so unexpected. Now, there are all sorts of ideas about how it got there and what it did and so on and so on. But here's the thing that occurred to me. What are the chances? I mean, we've talked about the improbability of finding fossils. Park that in your mind as well. What are the chances of a group of people digging a hole in the ground and finding, just by chance, the only unexpected of tiny little dwarf human that ever existed on the earth ever? The chances of that are nil. Just discovering that creature implied that there was an enormous diversity of human beings. Originally, they thought it lived till 18,000 years ago, which is just a breath ago, but it's been revised to about 50,000, which is still not very long. What are the chances that this was the only one? There must have been more fossil humans living around of various sizes and kinds until fairly recently. And indeed, some more have been found in the Philippine Islands on the island of Luzon. We talked about Gigantopithecus, which lived till 1.8, maybe a million years ago in Southeast Asia. You're living in a country that's very rich in undiscovered diversity. Even with all the people, even with all the wars and conflicts and people running around, there are still animals coming out of Southeast Asia that nobody has discovered.
You know about that cave they found in Vietnam. Oof.
Oh, no, tell me.
The massive cave with its own rainforest inside the cave?
Wow. Here's another thing I found at Nature. We got this paper in 1992 from some people from Vietnam and Laos. It was just hunting trophies. It was just the skin and horns and skull of an antelope that had never been found before. I thought, crikey, this is 1990, not 1890. This is like some Victorian zoology. And it was a creature called the saola, which is a new species of antelope. And this is not a tiny creature. It's as big as a cow. I mean, it could do you damage if it stepped on your foot. But only recently has anyone actually ever seen one alive. These creatures go out of their way to go out of their way. They are so rare. This is when you think that people have shaken every tree and looked under every rock to find unknown creatures. So I just speculated to myself, what if there is some relics hominin somewhere living probably in the Annamite Mountains between Laos and Vietnam and southern China that nobody's ever found? It's unlikely, but it's possible. Now, I think all the records we have now of Bigfoot and Orang Pendek and the Yeti are just almost certainly wishful thinking and tosh. However, because of fossilization is so rare, because these hominins, these human creatures live so recently, it's not inconceivable that some have lived till the present day. I don't want to go out and say to people, bring me the head of Alfredo Garcia, because if these creatures are rare, I don't want people to kill them just to publish them in a scientific journal. But I wouldn't be at all surprised. Now, for 98% of human existence, we've been accompanied by other human species. At the moment, we're the only one, and that tends to give us a false perspective of evolutionary progression to us, but there were lots of others until quite recently.
You mentioned some of the hard to get to out-of-the-way locations in a place like Laos and Vietnam. And we brought up with the Florens ban earlier, but isn't there a part of Indonesia that was located in the last 5, 6, 7 years that a group of scientists located? They went in there and they were not even able to tell anybody where they were going. There never, as far as I could tell, no Homo sapiens had ever been there. And they found all kinds of new species and flora there and whatnot. That's truly finding the lost world, so to speak.
The thing about Southeast Asia and Indonesia in particular, it's like a gigantic Swiss cheese. The whole thing is a limestone plateau. It's mostly been inundated by the sea because sea level, even without climate change, the sea level is quite high at the moment. Most of these creatures got to other islands when the sea level was much lower and they walked there across land bridges. The thing about limestone is it's very easily erodable and you get full of caves. Now, there are caves in Borneo, Flores, Sulawesi that are so deep and they're so full of deposits of earth that people are nowhere near the bedrock. Some of these caves are very long and very deep. They're full of all sorts of amazing things. Whenever I hear rumours of undiscovered species, I thought, yeah, it's going to be from the limestone of Southeast Asia, because there's still unexplored parts of the world even today, even on our back doorstep when they're people a few miles away being very populous and people-y. Sometimes these things are known by the locals, the indigenous people. They will know about them, so they are known. They're just not known to Western science. For example, the Saola was known to hunters. Occasionally they would get one and put a trophy on their wall of their house, but they hadn't been reported to the West, as it were.
How are you on time?
I've got all the time in the world. I'm a paleontologist.
I might ask you a handful of more questions. If you won't turn off, I'll keep asking. We brought up the asteroid that took out the dinosaurs. From the faraway reaches of my amateur sleuthing mind, we think about the dinosaurs going extinct, that asteroid hitting near Mexico, I believe. What had to happen when that hit? Most dinosaurs, obviously, gone. But what had to survive to give us the large life forms we have today, the mammals today? What had to make it through? Something had to make it through to get us to the age of mammals from that extinction event.
Well, the thing is, the dinosaurs were the poster boys and girls of the extinction. People have wondered whether any dinosaurs survived. There have been a few ideas that they survived, that some survived, but they've never been really properly verified. But most birds, which are technically dinosaurs in the long view, survived. I mean, there were some extinctions, but birds survived. Tiny mammals survived. Now, mammals had been around since the dinosaurs evolved, but they were usually quite small and nocturnal. There were some that became as large as badger or possum or something, but they were not very big. They survived because mammals are very good at staying out of the way and living down holes and burrowing deep until everything has gone. And they're also very good at scavenging on tiny scraps and insects. I mean, cockroaches, they're indestructible. They would, of course, survive. But immediately after, there were lots of small mammals, but there are also some gigantic flightless birds. For the first few million years after the extinction, the top predator were enormous flightless birds with heads the size of horses' heads and huge beaks. Any mammal that came out of its burrow would have been decapitated by one of these birds. But the birds went away eventually, and mammals then evolved into much larger forms because the mammals were just waiting for the dinosaurs to become extinct, because all the dinosaurs occupied all the ecological space for large animals. All the large carnivores were dinosaurs, all the herbivores were dinosaurs. There wasn't any space for the mammals to occupy. But as soon as that space was released, what you tend to find is that ecology abhors a vacuum. If there's a resource to colonize, something somewhere will colonize it. And so the mammals diversified into lots of large herbivorous and carnivorous forms. But the first wave of mammals, they're all rather primitive. We wouldn't kind of recognize them now. About 10 million years later, the Earth became a jungle planet. It just became really hot. And so a lot of these big mammals were swept away, and mammals diversified into the mammals we get today. But they're mostly jungly things, or whales. Whales diversified really quickly about 55 million years ago. Over a space of 8 million years, they diversified from things that looked like dogs into fully formed whales. Went back to the water with indecent haste and a great deal of enthusiasm. And then the jungle went away. The Earth has been cooling generally since about 50 million years ago. It's been generally cooling. Most of the forests were replaced by great plains, and so there was room for big herbivores and big carnivores. So wherever you go, wherever you find, you'll tend to find big carnivores and big herbivores. They could be mammals, they could be dinosaurs, they could be the things before the dinosaurs, therapsids, you don't spell them as therapists, which were distant cousins of the mammals. And before that, there were other things. Mammals survived, birds survived. In fact, quite a lot of things survived. They were bruised and bloody and depleted, but they survived. So to give us the world. But if the dinosaurs hadn't died out, who knows what would have happened?
I would love nothing more, and I'm going to bring up Jack Horner's desire in a minute, but I would love nothing more if the dinosaurs would have survived. How are we in terms of the mammoth coming back? Are we going to get one?
Well, we might get something, but it won't be a mammoth. The thing is with life on Earth, it's all very interdependent. And in the Ice Age, you tend to see pictures of mammoths in this blasted, snowy desert. Well, that wouldn't have had mammoths in them because obviously there's nothing for them to eat. Mammoths are big. They need to eat a lot. Mammoths lived in this kind of grassland which we don't see today. It's not the same as a prairie. It's not the same as a tundra. It was called mammoth steppe. It had a whole range of plants that you don't see together today. There were salt-loving plants and tender plants and plants that love dry weather, plants that love the damp, plants that were warm-loving, plants that love cold. So you had this great, rich lawn, this huge meadow that spread over the whole of the northern hemisphere called mammoth steppe. And it supported an incalculable tonnage of game. Mammoth, horses, bison, rhinoceroses, something called yesterday's camel. I'm amazed about that. And lots of other stuff. The mammoth became extinct really because of the climate change and the reduction of mammoth steppe when the climate of the earth changed so that mammoth steppe was not supported. With the decline of mammoth steppe became the decline of the mammoth. People came along and finished the job, but mammoths were really declining until the very last mammoths lived in this tiny island called Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean. And they were very tiny mammoths. They dwarfed, and you tend to think that they dwarfed so much, they dwarfed to the size of peanuts and then just blew away. But I think they were hunted out to the end, the very last ones. You could create maybe with some DNA and a bit of elephant DNA and put it and clone it and put it into an obliging lady elephant and see if something would come out. It might be an interesting curiosity, but you can't have mammoths without mammoth steppe. The two of them, we haven't got mammoth steppe, and we'll never be able to recreate it because the whole climate of the earth is entirely different. You could say the same thing about dinosaurs. I mean, wouldn't it be lovely to have a dinosaur? But here's something that even the creators of Jurassic Park realised. There's something when Alan, what's his name, the Jack Horner character, and they're going in the Jeep Park, and there's Laura Dern's character, who's the paleobotanist, and she says, but you've got to have all the right plants. People think plants are just the background, but plants are as important as the animals, and some of the plants might be poisonous, and you've got to recreate the plants as well as the animals. And there were whole different plants in the days of the dinosaurs as well. You could have some sort of cludged together Frankensteinian thing that would be living in public exhibition, but it wouldn't really be a dinosaur or a mammoth. It would be, in Jurassic World, love that film, the monster was a completely human-created cloned monster that was a kind of super T-Rex that had never actually existed. That kind of makes the point. I mean, you could create some of these things. I don't know if these things could be created, but I think the answer to your question is you couldn't really bring the mammoth back to life because the conditions in which mammoths lived are gone. They're not there anymore.
As we're talking all kinds of different topics and my mind is wandering and I've got you, let me take you down to the southern hemisphere. Let me go down to Argentina. And at some point in time in my life, I'm going to have to go down there and find a group of paleontologists. Maybe I'll ring you up and find out who I should talk to. I just want to be exposed to the finds. I mean, I won't get a chance to find it myself, but I want to be exposed to the finds that are happening down there in the southern hemisphere, specifically the very largest dinosaurs ever. I love anything I can find on YouTube that's going to talk about what they think is the biggest one ever been found. I just love that stuff. I want you to comment on that. I want you to give me some flavor that maybe I'm not even thinking about. But I also want you to connect me bringing this up to, and maybe I'm going out on a limb here, maybe I'm wrong, but even those largest dinosaurs, somewhere deep in their DNA, they were designed for flight?
Yeah. You're talking about Argentinosaurus. Now, there's a lot of research in Argentina. There are various fantastic locations in northern Argentina and in southern Argentina. Lots of fantastic dinosaurs are found there. Some of the earliest dinosaurs are found in Argentina. Some of these gigantic sauropod dinosaurs like Argentinosaurus and some incredibly huge carnivores fed on them. I mean, it was quite a wild place. The thing about dinosaurs is they were always designed for flight. And there's several things. One is that it starts with their breathing system. Now, when you breathe in and then you breathe out, this is actually quite an inefficient way of breathing because all the air goes in the one place, it all comes out. You don't really have the chance at the same breath to inhale, to completely fill your lungs with oxygen and expel all the waste carbon dioxide. But dinosaurs had this air handling system, and we know this because birds have it, and also because people have found little holes in the bones. The air went into the lungs, but then it went through a system of one-way valves into all sorts of little bags and sacs. Then it went into the dinosaur went into the lungs, but then it went elsewhere through all sorts of little one-way valves into all air sacs that permeated all through the body, even into the bones. They surround the internal organs. Dinosaurs were full of air. Now, this makes breathing more efficient because it helps clear carbon dioxide better than doing it through the blood, but it also cools the internal organs. The liver in one of these Argentinosauruses would have been the size of a car. If it's had an air sac directly next to it, it cools, it takes away the heat from the liver. The liver is the main organ that does things in the body. It does all the metabolism. It's the kind of factory, and so it creates all the heat. And because of that, that means dinosaurs could grow really big without boiling themselves from the inside out. So that's one thing. It's mainly the system. Dinosaurs were very lightly constructed. If you look at the mounted skeleton of one of these dinosaurs and you look at the vertebrae, they're reduced to these struts that actually were the bits that bore the weight, the structure, just like some tubular scaffolding structure. They managed to use the minimal amount of bone to create the maximum strength. Birds today have this rigid, air-filled, lightweight airframe. Argentinosaurus is best seen not as a huge leviathan, a behemoth, but a gigantic quadrupedal, featherless bird.
If someone has not seen, if you've been out to lunch and maybe you're not some strange dinosaur guy like me, if you've not gone...
Man, I'm always out to lunch.
I was going to say, but if somebody's not what we are, if you've not gone onto YouTube and watched some recreation, one of these massive, as they would have been called, the only name when I was a kid, the brontosaur, you know? A lot more names these days, but it's just amazing. As we wind down, I want to take you a little bit more into your science fiction headspace. I had a guest on this show a while back, an economist named Robin Hanson. I can't recall the exact book, but he got to thinking about what would be the first version of AI for us. I'm sure you've thought about that. Will we develop some robot, the same intelligence as us, and just be us? And Hanson's theory was that what we will do is we will figure out a way to port what is in our mind to a drive, and then we'll give that drive a virtual world, and then we'll be fine. We'll be in the virtual world. Our mind will be ported to a drive. And he's got a whole theory about where we will eventually do this, and the best minds will get ported to a drive, and they'll be duplicated because they'll be the best workers and all that kind of fun stuff. How do you think about this version of AI? And of course, there's a lot of futurists that talk about this and the singularity and all this type of thing. How do you look at it? What's your perspective?
My perspective is that AI is in some ways very clever, but also extremely dim. AI is very good at what computers do, which is crunching a load of information extremely quickly, extracting patterns from large amounts of data. And that is essentially what AI does. Now, you've heard that Google has got Deep Blue, the chess program that could beat
Kasparov.
Recently, the game of Go, which is in many ways at least as subtle. An AI was taught Go from nothing and then could beat the Korean world master at Go. But all of that is just heavy-duty number crunching. It's very difficult to put anything you describe as intuition in it. Now, it could be that what we do in our heads is heavy-duty number crunching and comes out as intuition. But I have a feeling that what goes on in this sort of squishy lump of putty between our ears is very, very hard to model. It's as a computer. Because we have computers and computers can seem intelligent, we tend to model our brain as a computer. But I'm not sure that that is true. People have tried to do this because I think there's a lot more to our consciousness than the brain. It extends throughout, not consciousness as such. I mean, that's a whole other discussion. But our whole body, we need all our perceptions to inform and integrate the view of the world around us and how we process information. Partly because we only process the information that evolution has honed us to see. I mean, we don't see everything around us all the time in fixed focus. We tend to select what we see. We're very good at ignoring things around us that are actually in plain view. Because, here's a digression, have you seen that video where there's some people playing basketball outside an elevator? And what you're told to do is count how many times somebody passes a ball to the other. You're watching this video, people are counting, and then the instructor, whoever it was, will say, how many times did you see the ball being passed? And somebody will say 11, and somebody will say 30. And then you say, did anyone notice the gorilla? And you say, what gorilla? And then he shows the film again, and there's this gorilla, or person in the gorilla suit, that comes actually front and centre and growling at you, and nobody's noticed this because they've been told to concentrate on people throwing the ball. I think the human mind doesn't work in a computer-like way, and I don't think you would be able to capture the state of a human mind in some kind of quantum way and then transfer it to some computer. I mean, quantum computers, who knows? I mean, only my cats know about those. They're weird things. Could never say never, but I think that is very much science fictional. I think that there will always be a place for human beings to do things because humans see unexpected things and humans do unexpected things. And each human being comes to a task with a whole compost of previous experiences and attitudes and mindsets that might colour the way they would react to a situation. The short answer to your question is probably not.
The basketball example, I believe the professor's name was Daniel Simons, who I think was on this show actually many years ago. You brought up the example of us, our intelligence being more than our mind alone. And the first thing, of course, another YouTube addiction of mine, watching octopus and squid videos. That immediately got me thinking about that. Like, they're the masters of obviously being much more than the mind. I mean, there might be a mind in each one of their arms, frankly.
I think the octopus is the closest thing we have on Earth to an alien. I mean, here's another science fiction film, which is Arrival. Have you seen Arrival?
I've seen Arrival, yes.
It stars Amy Adams, and she's a linguist who's hired to decipher the squirrels of this octopoid alien who arrived in the spaceship. The octopus is truly alien. I mean, it has a huge brain, but it's constructed in a completely different way from the human brain. And as you say, it does a lot of things with its arms the rest of its brain isn't doing. It has a kind of really sophisticated muscle memory. I mean, in a sense, human beings have this if they're trained. I mean, when you learn to drive a car, you're never going to think of all these things at once. You're steering and the looking in the mirror and doing the stick shift and the gears and all that. You think you're never going to do it. But then after a while, you just do it without really thinking about it. And you're thinking more about what you're going to have for dinner and what you're going to do when you get home. You do all that sort of thing automatically. I suppose that's a bit like octopus. Now, our spinal cord has 500 million neurons in it. Here's another thing. Your gut has its own brain. Your gut has as many neurons as there are neurons in your spinal cord, and it is quasi-independent from your brain. Your spine and your lower brain does all sorts of things that you don't know about, and the same with your gut. Now, anyone who's had food poisoning or diarrhea will know that your gut can do things instinctively that you have no control over. We have all this neural control throughout our bodies. We are more than our minds. But here's another conceit we get into. When we look at intelligent animals, we tend to interpret them as not very good humans. I mean, I love my dogs. I have 3 dogs. Dogs are intelligent, sensitive creatures. We tend to think of them as human for a number of reasons. One is that dogs are social carnivores, just like humans, so they have a similar social structure. The second is that dogs and humans have co-evolved over 40,000 years. The first invention of the human being was the dog. That was our first invention of technology. We tend to think of human mind as a kind of superior version of a dog mind. But dogs think of things in different ways. It's a mistake to anthropomorphize them because dogs don't think with their eyes, they think with their noses, and they do all sorts of revolting things, and they do all sorts of things that we wouldn't do. But here's another one. Crows. We think big brains are important, but crows have a brain the size of a nut, and yet they're capable of deceit and lying. They think about what other things are thinking when they hide things. I mean, here's an experiment by a good friend of mine, Nikki Clayton, and you should have her on your show, Nicola Clayton in Cambridge. Her husband, Nathan Emery, does the same thing with parrots, but she has been working on these crows called Western scrub jays. And there's another paper of hers that we published was what Western scrub jays, they will get some food and they will bury it in a hole while all the other jays are looking. And then everyone goes away. And the jay that has buried the food will come back later when there's no one there, dig up the food and then bury it somewhere else in secret. So it knows that all the other jays will want to pinch its food. And so it's trying to put its mind, what would I do if I were one of those? And here's the killer. The jays that tend to do this most are those that are the most practiced thieves. Here is a little animal thinking of deceit. This is something that humans can only achieve when they're 3, when they start to think of themselves as individual agents rather than just a blank cinema screen watching things happen in front of them.
I was thinking about your stick shift comment. I grew up on a stick shift, and it's an entirely different way of driving. It's so much more enjoyable, and you feel so much more connected versus getting into just an automatic.
I agree. You feel much more part of the machine. I tend to drive an automatic. My automatic was in the garage. I borrowed my sister's tiny little Suzuki stick shift, and it was like a beach buggy. I had such fun whizzing around this. I mean, I stalled horribly for the first few minutes because I'd forgotten how to use one.
This is kind of like a origins question of you. I don't know everything about you, but okay, you've gone down a different path. I mean, I've gone down a different path, but a lot of people are kind of like 9 to 5 and they get kind of stuck in the rut. You're obviously a very curious guy. How did this curiosity start? Like, why are you not like just a 9 to 5 kind of guy? Why did you go down this path? Why did you believe enough in your own curiosity that you could find your way and be happy in this versus being a banker in a suit in London, going to work 9 to 5 and staring at a screen all day long? Why did you become different?
I think it's partly because I'm a skeptic. I think I'm always trying to think about the motives of people. I mean, I don't remember this, but my mother would say to me in elementary school, some other kid would say, "Hey, Henry, do you want a sweet?" And I wouldn't say yes or no. I said I'd think about it. I was exposed at an early age to museums, old-fashioned museums full of weird stuff. We grew up in South London near a fantastic museum called the Horniman Museum, which is actually not far from the famous Crystal Palace dinosaurs that were the first dinosaur recreations made for the Great Exhibition in 1851. I used to go to these museums, and my mother will tell me I was in my stroller and I always wanted to see the most gruesome dissections of cats and Egyptian mummies and all that stuff. So I loved the weird, curious stuff. But I never heard, even when I was small, I never heard of dinosaurs. This was when the dinosaurs, believe it or not, in the early 60s, dinosaurs were kind of unfashionable. I had this book, in fact, I've still got it, that was given to me by a friend of my father's, and it was called The Look and Learn Book of the Wonders of Nature, and had all sorts of amazing pictorial things about the natural world. It had something about fossils, but there was no dinosaurs in it. And on the back, it had a picture of dinosaurs. It was a rip-off of a very famous mural that's at the Peabody Museum called The Age of Reptiles, and it had bits of it, and it had dinosaurs in it. But it didn't say anywhere in the book what the back cover was. I have this book today, and so I know this is true. And so I didn't know what these creatures were. But then, when I was about 5, I was taken to the Natural History Museum in London, and then it all just clicked. Back in the day, the Natural History Museum was a dusty place. Not many people visited it. It wasn't really a destination. So I had a lot of it all to myself. I used to spend days in there, but I used to seek out all the galleries that no one else was looking at. And the dinosaurs were great, but I was most entranced by the fossil fish gallery because that went back to the origins of vertebrates. And I was really interested in the parts of history or prehistory that people didn't really know anything about. I thought to myself, if I were a historian, I would specialize in the 5th century of Britain. And the reason I do that is because virtually nothing is known about it. The Romans had collapsed and the Anglo-Saxons had yet to arrive and establish a literate culture. Who knows what was going on? Same with the origin of the vertebrates. Nobody knew anything about it. So I wanted to see these very early fish. So I've always been interested in beginnings and origins and how things happen, particularly the bits that people don't know much about. That's always been my kind of intellectual playground. One thing I've realized, and I've written books or I've written fiction, I've written fact, but the thing that has always fascinated me is the unknown. The thing that fascinates me is the things we don't know, how much there is that we don't know. And the paradox that the more we know, we realize that the ignorance increases disproportionately. It's like the cliche, this research raises more questions than it answers. It's always like being at the edge of the unknown. That's always what I've enjoyed since I was very small.
Yeah, if you walk into the unknown, it's just exciting. It does something to you. You forget about time. You're just like, I'm in the middle of this. Whereas if you know what the known is every day of your life, it's kind of like you're just waiting for the end. When you don't know what's next or you don't know what's behind that curtain, oh, wow, that's the feeling.
I agree. It's the kind of terror. It's the sort of feeling you get when you're watching a horror film. It's the kind of frisson of terror you get by the unknown. But it's also the enormous size of the unknown. I mean, you're familiar with Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and he's talking about the size of space. And he says, space is big, really big. I mean, you think it's a long way down the street to the post office, but that's peanuts to space. And in fact, most people find space so big that they tend to try and find somewhere a bit smaller. And then he goes on something. But I think that's quite true. I think most people are afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of confronting things that are truly weird and unexpected. And I think this is why Homo Floresiensis was my favorite paper, because it really was an unknown. I mean, posterity will show that the greatest philosopher of the 20th century was Donald Rumsfeld, and his classification of knowledge into the known known, the known unknown, and the unknown unknown. Science is in the known unknown. There are things that we know that we don't know. We know that there's stuff out there that we don't know, but the real fun is in the unknown unknown, things we didn't know we didn't know. And that's when the real fun starts, like Homo Floresiensis was one.
Just to share really quick, I mean, it's one of the reasons I ended up in or stayed in a place like Vietnam. I remember early on, and I've got a video of this, a nice lady, she took me to a nice restaurant. They took us into the kitchen and we got to watch the two guys hold a cobra, and they slit the cobra and they put that heart into a shot glass and they added vodka and they said, Mike, here, drink the beating heart shot glass. And of course I did. But it's like, okay, that sounds weird. It sounds crazy. But I was also the kid at age 16 when they had fetal pig dissection day. And the teacher fell asleep, literally fell asleep. And we had buckets of pigs. And then we had contests to see who could decapitate the pigs the fastest. So I guess it's not a surprise that I would then swallow a beating cobra heart for no reason other than the fact to do it. Sounds like you relate to this a little bit.
I'll eat anything once. I mean, I've not visited Vietnam, but I've visited China. I love China. My guests would put something strange in front of me and see if I'd eat it. And then would be surprised, Henry, do you know what that is? I said, no, it tastes nice. Oh, it's donkey. Oh, that's fine.
It throws Asian people off for a loop. If you're a white guy here, they want to shock you with the food. And if you're just like, okay, I'll eat it. And then they're like, what? You ate that? We don't even eat that. That's what they tell me. I don't even eat the cobra heart. You ate the cobra heart. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, as I say, I'll try anything once. I mean, life's very short and it's good to have plenty of experiences in it. When I visited China, my mum is a pronounced foodie, so I made detailed mental notes of everything I ate so I could tell her in great detail when I got home about the food and the wonderful banquets and the strange things that we ate and what it was like and how it was served and all that.
There is nothing in Asia that I have not yet tried.
Well, I've never been to that part of the world. I mean, I'd love to go one day, but the street food must be phenomenal.
And honestly, the only times, and I mean, I've been all around Asia, but the only times that I've gotten generally sick in Asia is probably some Western 5-star hotel. Whereas if you're out on the street food and there's 50 people in line and they're making it in front of you, the chances of illness are lower.
I've never felt healthier than when I've been in China. You know Jared Diamond, great guy. I'm pleased to call him a friend of mine. He wrote in one of his books, I mean, he's been living in Papua New Guinea with the tribes, eating what they eat and living with them for months at a time. But he says the only time he's got really sick from eating food was some potted shrimp from a stall in Cambridge, England. That was the only time he got sick enough he nearly died. But he's out eating kangaroo and eating taro porridge, which he says tastes like vomit and, all sorts of stuff, and living on it and probably being quite healthy. You're quite right. You just have to eat something in a Western hotel. And I saw when I go to China, I just eat what the Chinese ate. And that's what I did. And I loved it.
The book, A Very Short History of Life on Earth, 4.6 billion years in 12 pithy chapters. I think everybody probably knows that I did not even scratch the surface of all of the content in the book, kind of the greatest hits, my interests, whatnot. Really cool stuff, Henry. I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything I missed that you wanted to bring up? I think people should just go dive in. I mean, look, I see so many business books. Here's how you be an entrepreneur. Okay, I can't read any more of these. Please stop. They're all the same. Please stop. I can't. Don't send me anymore. I can't do it. For everyone that thinks sometimes maybe I don't like to think that I have the same guests on, but Henry, you definitely fit the mold of somebody coming from a different headspace, a different perspective, and very fun stuff. So I really appreciate you coming on and giving some perspective.
Thank you, Michael. I'm very, very glad you invited me, and it's been so much. And, one of these days we'll actually sit together in person in Vietnam and enjoy some interesting food and chat all day.
Yes. Please keep me posted because I know you write a lot, but I'd love to have you on every once in a while. If you've got the time, I would not retread the same ground. I would just keep taking you off in different places,
Time is an illusion, lunchtime doubly so. It's another Douglas Adams. What would we have done without him? But thank you very much, Michael. It's been an absolute blast.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.